I think she's been told several times over that she shouldn't feel pressured into forcing herself to maintain
Sure.
it if she's not feeling well. If she's not feeling well. So.
Did you want to maybe indicate to her that if she did feel the need to take the afternoon off, that the lawyers on both sides would lift her up on their shoulders and carry her around the room?
Richard, but perhaps we should later. Maybe much later. But in any event, we'll bring everybody out and we'll try to get as much done as we can, and hopefully she'll stay well. Okay, so Penny, why don't you invite her in, and Mr. Prescott or Mr. Hamaj is going to get the witness?
Correct, Your Honor.
Okay, great.
Yes.
I forgot to print it, and I will. And if we figure it out, I'll go back. I'll go back and substitute that page. But I wrote it. I went back and listened to it, and I heard those guys preparing it. Okay.
Thanks. Welcome back, folks. Please be seated. And Mr. Amaji, call the next witness.
The defense calls Mary Pat Bolanos.
And good afternoon, ma'am. Yeah, right up here. Come on up here and raise your right hand, and we'll get you sworn in and we'll get started. Do you swear affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please have a seat.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
I'm going to ask you to try to speak into the microphone here. And my first question is not going to be a question at all. It's going to be a request, and that is to please state your name and spell it for the record.
Mary Patricia Bolanos, B as in boy, O-L-A-N-O-S.
Okay, and Ms. Bolanos, could you give us an address where you reside, please?
6633 East Barrow in Tucson, Arizona, 85730.
Okay. And are you related to Joe McEnroe?
Yes, he's my cousin.
Okay. There's been some testimony about the various family relations. Would you explain how it is you're related? Who's your mother?
My mom's Mary Turner. His mom is Sean McEnroe, her sister.
Okay.
Or, sorry, Sean Jones. Or Johnson.
Sean is Mary Turner's sister?
Yes.
And your name is Mary also?
Yes, that's why I go by Mary Pat.
Got it. Just to foreshadow a little bit, your sisters, do you have a sister?
Yes, she is also Regina.
Regina. But that is not Regina Farmer who
No,
testified.
that's my aunt.
Okay. Before today, when was the last time you saw Joe McEnroe?
I'd say 98?
1998?
Yeah, 97, 98.
Okay. And what state was that in that you last saw him?
California.
Okay. Would you explain, well, let me ask you this. Did you live near Joe for a period of your life?
Yes, we lived in the same apartment for a while and then in the same apartment complex.
Okay. And would you tell us, please, what year were you born?
1974.
Okay, so you're about 4 years older than Joe, roughly?
Yeah.
Okay. And for what period of time, why don't you tell us how old roughly Joe was, or what years it was that you lived in the same complex or nearby him?
I'd say I was 12 till the time I was 17. So, and then I left to Arizona for a year, and then I went back. And at that time they had moved, and then they came back also.
Okay, and when you went to Arizona, did that coincide at all with the times that Mr. McEnroe went to Arizona?
No.
Okay. So you were roughly 12 to 17, and so Mr. McEnroe, Joe, at the time was roughly 8 to
7 or 8
12
to
or something like
12,
that?
13, yeah. And then we moved away, and then we came back, and they lived. At that point, Sarah and Ian were born. So.
At that point, Sarah and Ian were born?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm referring to his brother and sister?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So during the course of your living with or nearby him, did you have the opportunity to observe the conditions in his household?
Yes.
Okay. Would you, first of all, let's start with the time when you lived in the same household with him. Who all was living there?
It was me, my sister Regina, Sean, Joey, and Chris. And I think Martin may have been there for part of that. And then we moved to another apartment building, and that was when we all lived together.
Okay.
So it's Martin, my mom, Sean, Joey, Chris, me, and my sister Regina.
You all living in one apartment?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what was it like living with Sean and her family? What was that like?
I love the boys. They're awesome. Sean was frustrated a lot.
What was Sean frustrated about?
Everything. She was just grumpy all the time. And she seemed to take it out on Joey more than anybody else.
Would you explain what you observed and what your memories are from that time, please?
I remember one time we had just moved into our apartment. We were starting school. Martin was very, sit down, do your homework as soon as you get home, and then you can go play. As soon as you get home, and then you can go play. So me and Joey were sitting next to each other at the kitchen table, and Joey had the fat pencils that the little, little kids start to learn to write with. Couldn't get.
Ms. Bolanos, I'm just going to ask you to speak a little more slowly so that the court
Oh, I'm
reporter
sorry.
doesn't start to...
So Joey couldn't figure out the correct pressure on a pencil. He was getting frustrated. He was trying to erase it. He was getting upset. He wasn't getting.
Slow down.
Sorry. He wasn't getting the question, the math problem right.
Okay.
And Sean came up and started slamming his head into the wall. And I jumped up at that point and stopped her.
You went after Sean?
Pretty much. I kind of got between them. And at that point, I was already bigger than her. So. Okay. And then did that stop? At that point did.
Okay. Did you observe any other instances of physical abuse by Sean against Jeff?
Sean was more mean than she was really physical.
Okay. Explain how she was mean. Explain what you heard or saw.
If anything would set her off, if it was work or people or just anything, she would end up. Joey was her dog.
Joey was your dog?
Yeah, he would be really quiet and stuff. She would get mad. Christopher would just kind of take off and just like, I ain't dealing with you. Joey would just sit there and go. Joey would just sit there and take it, and then he would just kind of sulk off into his room and just real quiet and put his head down and
Put his head down?
just kind of be by himself in his room.
Record reflected as you were doing that, you were kind of
Yeah.
tucking your head down, is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
he was real quiet.
Do you know what Joe would do in his room in those instances?
Draw and listen to music.
Okay. Did he ever talk back to her or fight back or in any way?
No, never.
Now, is this something that you just observed while you lived in the same household as Sean, or after you had also moved to a nearby household?
After. Because when the kids got a little bit older, Joey had more responsibility with the kids, with Sarah and Ian. So he would come over to my house because my kids were about the same size, same age as Sarah and Ian. So we just kind of all hung out together and stuff all the time. And if something wasn't correct, Joey got it.
Okay, and just give us the age. First of all, how many kids do you have?
Now I have 5.
Okay,
At that point, I had 3.
3, and some of them were close in age to Joe and Chris?
Well, not Joe and Chris, Sarah and Ian.
Sarah and Ian, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay, so you observed as Joe had more responsibility, this happened. Was that any different from before Sarah and Ian were around? What was the dynamic between Sean and Joe when it was just Chris and Joe and Sean?
If Sean got mad, Joey would just sit there and take it. He would just sit there and just look at her and wouldn't really do anything, do anything but get up and go. Yeah, I mean, get up when she was done talking to him. She would, you know, he would just go and do his own thing. Little Chris, or I call him Little Chris, but Chris would jump and just like, I'm not listening, you're done, you know, he would just walk off. So instead of yelling at Christopher, she would go and take that frustration out on Joey.
Okay, and just so we're clear, why do you call him Little Chris?
Because my ex-husband is Big Chris. There's 3 Chris's in our little group. So my ex-husband's Big Chris, Little Chris was Little Chris.
2 Marys, 2 Ginas, 3 Chris's.
2 Trudys.
Okay.
Yeah, we got all the names are.
Fair enough. When Sean was talking to Joe, was it when she was angry? Was it just her tone of voice by which you could tell she was angry, or was there anything else?
She was just mean. She would just really get mean with Joey and somewhat with Chris. But like I said, Chris would just kind of take off. Joey would just sit there and take it.
Would she raise her voice
Yes.
a lot? Was she yelling?
She would just yell, and I would have no clue what she was yelling about. She would just start going off the wall about everything, and we were like, what's the problem? So we would hear them getting yelled at from our apartment and down the way, and my ex-husband and me would kind of like, hey, let's go take the boys, and we would go take them, go get them ice cream or something, take them out of the house.
Was that allowed? Did Sean let you do that?
Yes, because Chris Bolanos was my ex-husband. He was a good guy. So, and she kind of used Chris as the father figure, I like the manly figure.
Okay.
You know, there was Martin, but then there was Chris. And Chris really liked Joey, so they would do like art and stuff like that. And he just thought he was a cool kid and give him music and stuff, so.
Okay. And was Sean, would she ever call the kids names?
Yeah, that's, there's more than a few times that she would scream and call him maggots and stuff. Well, Joey, call him a maggot. And there was more than a few times that he was called a maggot.
Just
And-
that name or anything
yeah.
else?
Well, he was called all sorts of names, but that name just stuck out. So, and it stuck out, me and my ex-husband were just talking about it, and he doesn't like that name just because of that reason. Because, you know, that sticks with people.
Okay. She didn't say that to Chris?
If he did, Chris blew her off and walked off. I mean, Chris didn't pay much attention to Sean.
Okay.
She didn't really have any control over him.
But Joe did pay attention to her?
Yeah, Joe didn't do anything. He would just sit there.
Once, when you would take the boys, Chris and Joe, over to your house, would Sean ever intervene in that or ever come get them back? Or anything
No,
like
she
that?
would expect that Chris Bolanos was disciplining him. And usually it was Chris was getting him out of.
Okay.
But that was what she thought was going on, was that Big Chris was disciplining him.
Okay. How about housekeeping? How was Sean's housekeeping?
She was a mess. She was a slob. But she was having Joey take care of everything. She was working like 2 jobs all the time. She always had at least 1 job, if not 2. And he's a kid trying to take care of the kids and deal with other kids because we lived in a big apartment building, so there's always tons of kids in there. So he's trying to clean up after them, trying to change diapers and get everything taken care of. And he was a kid, so...
Was he responsible for cleaning and stuff like that before Sarah and Ian came along, when Joe himself was younger?
Not so much. I mean, he still had to clean up and stuff. She complained all the time. She was always sick. She was always sick. So always sick. So Joey was having to take care of Chris at that point. But Sarah and Ian, they came a little bit later. And then once that happened, she had to work even more hours to take care of things because she was a single mom. So Joey was just...
Was she, getting child support from any of the fathers?
No. She got, like, state assistance.
Like public assistance?
Mm-hmm.
But do you know, was she getting actual, I mean, there's fathers involved
No.
here. There was not fathers involved?
No. No.
Okay. Well, I'll come back to that in a minute, but let me ask you said that Sean was a mess. I mean, there's a difference between messy and dirty.
She was gross.
Would you give us some examples, please?
Well, like, one time I my mom lived upstairs from them, and then I lived in another apartment, and I would just kind of run back and forth just to check on the boys. And I remember one time she had her period. I am not picking that up. That's gross. And she yelled at Joey because the bathroom wasn't cleaned up. And so I would assume that Joey ended up having to clean that up. And she'd get sick, and she would let everybody know. She'd be with the bathroom door open. You went around the hallway, and the hallway opened right to the bathroom. And she'd be throwing up, and everybody knew, and she just was a mess.
So it's a small apartment.
Mess.
So it's a small apartment, right? I mean, there's a little bit of, you're living in close proximity with other people. You're going to have some bodily functions, right? Was it just that, or was it beyond what you would expect? Well, was it beyond just living in close proximity with other people? Were her habits such that you thought she should be doing more to sort of...
Well, they're boys. They didn't need to be, or he was a boy. He didn't need to be cleaning up after his mom, period, stuff like that. And I was like, I'm not touching it. You can deal with that. I'm not touching it. So. Okay.
How about, there's been some testimony about the number of boyfriends Sean had. Did she? Yes.
Oh.
Did she? Yes.
Oh, yeah. She always had people. And the boys' room, well, the three boys were in one room, and her and Sarah in the other room, and she would have sex with the doors open on it, like hanging like hats and scarves and stuff like that. So her door never closed, but she'd be having sex. And I've been there while she was having sex, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and I got the kids out of there. It's just like, you don't do that. And she was vocal.
Without delving
vocal.
into...
So you knew what she was doing.
She was vocal during the sex?
Yeah.
Okay. Could you see in the room also?
I didn't look.
Okay. All right. But the door was open?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know how she was doing financially? Did you have any sense of that?
I know she did a lot of like church charities. She got a lot of help with the church, and at one point she was Catholic, so she was going to Catholic charities, and then she became Jehovah's Witness, so she was going through some Jehovah's Witness charities, and then with the city or the county charities and stuff like that to get help with like utilities and all that. But she always worked, so she did always work. I know she had food stamps and stuff, and then during the summer the city had a program where I was getting paid to watch the kids, so I gave Joey a bit of a break. Because at that point, Chris was home also all the time, so.
About how old were you at that point?
3 kids. So I was 20.
You had 3 kids when you were 20?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I guess the question is why? Why? Did you have an opinion, or did you form an opinion as to why Sean was like this and had all these issues?
I mean, I just figured she had issues with men, and Joey was the man of the house. So Joey got the brunt of it. So she would have a bad date, or somebody was being mean to her, or bad day at work, and she would just come home like super grumpy, and Joey ended up having to deal with it.
Did Joe's role change at all as these different guys came in and out?
Whoever was there was in charge, and then when they left, Joey was having to pick up Sean's pieces, because Sean would be a mess or whatever. He'd be having to he would be having to walk on eggshells around her, and then still take care of everything else.
Do you know if there was ever any physical abuse from any of the boyfriends coming in and out?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Did you know John Jones?
Yes.
What was he like?
Interesting.
Interesting? Please tell us how.
Well, I know when Ian was born, I was 14, I believe, and to celebrate, he had me go up to his apartment, Sean wasn't there, and drink a 40 of King Cobra. And I'm 14 years old. I don't know what the purpose was for me to do that, but he gave a 14-year-old a full 40 of King Cobra. And I got too drunk and too stupid and too loud. He ended up getting my mom and having me go home. So he wasn't exactly a model parent.
Okay. Sounds like your ex-husband, Chris Bolanos, tried a little bit to
A little bit, yeah.
to be a model. But you had kids of your own at that time, right?
Yes.
Was that the whole time that you were living in the same complex as them?
Pretty much. I had my first one when I was 16, so.
Okay. let me ask you something. There was a reference in a CBS report that there was somebody living in Joe's household, a 15-year-old who was pregnant. Who was that, do you know?
That would have possibly been my sister.
Okay. And what, do you recall what caused you to lose contact, who moved away, or what the circumstances were of the family moving away?
I'm not sure the names. I know one was Rhonda, one was Marty, and they were at the apartment, and they just decided to move to Seattle. And I remember they had Joey and Chris in the back of the U-Haul truck the entire ride with all the pets and everybody up in the front with Sarah and Ian and Sean and the one guy, I think his name was Marty or something. But I know they rode on the back of the U-Haul truck, and I was furious when I found that out.
So when you say Marty, is that different from Martin?
That's different than Martin.
That's not Martin Evans?
Yeah.
Okay. And we don't know Marty's last name? Okay. And have you kept in touch with Joe over the years at all?
I had talked to him one time, I'd say like 2003, 2004, and I think he was still living on the East Coast, but I wasn't sure, and we just like emailed shortly, and then after that, oh actually that was later, before that, when they went to, I guess they went to Phoenix, and
Sean
they're in
and
Phoenix,
family.
yes. Sean called me, actually I talked to Joey and wanted to make sure they were okay and all of that, so then Joey, I said, if you need anything, you call me.
You said that to Joe?
Yeah, I said, but just do not give your money. A couple of months later, Sean gets on the phone. He's on the phone. He's apologizing. He had to give it to his mom. He didn't know what to do. His mom's calling me saying, I'm going to lose the kids. You need to take them. And if not, they're going to go in foster care and it's going to be your fault.
That's what she said?
Yeah. And at that point, I was 9 months pregnant, living with, 9 months pregnant with my fourth kid in a small apartment. I was already at the end of my lease. I was already stressed out. I wasn't working, just my husband was working, and I was like, I can't take on another 4 kids. And I told her no, and she's like, well, they're going in foster care then, and hung up on me. And
That phone call when he called you?
he was very upset that he had to let her know, but it was like we were the last chance, I think.
How could you tell that he was upset? Like what?
He was just very apologetic. He kept saying, I'm so sorry, it's just I didn't know what, I'm so sorry, I know. And I was like, okay, you can calm down, I'm not mad at you.
So, and you were very pregnant with your 4th child?
Yes.
And so you must have some sense, of what date, or roughly what year or date that
99.
was. 1999?
I had him October of 99.
Okay, it was while you were still pregnant?
Yes.
Okay,
So it would have been like September.
shortly before October
Yeah.
1999. Okay. When you were observing, when you were living in close proximity to Joe, did he ever seem depressed to you?
All the time. He would just
Explain how you know
retreat. If, like me or my sister or my mom or anybody else was home, he would retreat into his room. Because then we can kind of diffuse Sean. We could keep her occupied or whatever and talk to her or whatever. Joey would kind of go off into his room and just sit in the dark and draw or write stories or whatever, listen to music.
And what would he do as he was sitting in that room? He's drawing, like, what's the environment in there? Do you have the lights
It was
on?
dark. It was just really dark. His bedroom was under a balcony, so there wasn't a whole lot of light that came in. So it was dark in there, and he just kept it dark. It was really.
How did he keep it dark?
With the curtains were drawn, sometimes there would be blankets or sheets down on the bunk beds, but he just kept
Sheets,
it.
like hanging down from the.
Yeah,
So he had a little cave there.
little area. That was his.
Okay.
And he would just listen to his Walkman. So.
So she got him a Walkman.
And then my sister listened to a lot of music too, so she would give him a lot of tapes. And back when tapes were around, so he got tapes from Gina and then also from Chris, my Chris.
Okay. Do you know about Joe going to school and what his attendance habits were or anything like that?
No, I don't remember him going to school.
Why not?
Honestly, he would stay in the house when Sean was at work, and he was in the house, so I wouldn't really see him if he was home. And I just don't remember ever having him go to school, you know.
Do you remember what was the policies? You said that Martin was very sit down, do your homework now. Before you
Martin
go
was
outside.
gone when I was 16.
Hold on, I need a complete question
Oh.
before you answer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You said Martin was very sit down, do your homework now before.
You can go out and play.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes.
So before Martin moved in, or before you guys lived together, what was the homework rules or situation with Sean and the boys, or were they too young to have homework at that point?
I would say they were too young to have homework at that point because Joey was only like 7, and that's when we moved in together. So I didn't know him as like a first grader.
Okay. Did you know him when he was like a sixth grader or something like that?
Yes.
And did you have any sense of whether homework was getting done or whether there was any rules as to that?
There wasn't any rules because he was the one having to do it. I mean, Sean was always gone.
Did he ever come to you guys? Did Joe ever come to you or Chris Bolanos for help with homework?
No.
How about just to talk about problems or?
He kept to himself. He wouldn't talk about problems, but he would come over and want to talk about other stuff, like art and like games and, you know.
Sure.
He didn't really discuss problems.
Okay. Were the kids sort of well kept? Were they washed and cleaned and clothed and fit, or what?
Sarah was.
I'm sorry.
Sarah was. Sarah always had her hair pretty. She had like really crazy hair, so her mom would always do her hair, and she always wanted a little girl, and she would always tell her, "We're gonna go get pretties," and she would always make sure Sarah was. But Joey would wear like really old hand-me-downs. Like I have a picture of him at my grandpa's house, and his pants were like capris with his big old tube socks up on them and stuff. She wouldn't buy him clothes.
Did you have an opportunity to observe Joe interacting with kids outside the family at all?
The only person he really hung around was David Cote.
And what was he like with David Cote?
He was a kid. I don't know how to explain it. Like he was goofy.
Joe was?
Yeah, he was goofy when he was able to be. He was a big goofball. And when him and David were together, they'd be playing, Nintendo or what have you, and they would just be kids. Where when he was at home, it was real somber.
Somber. Did you ever see Joe or know Joe to get involved in fights with other kids?
No, Joey always would try and calm the. Chris was the one that always got in fights, so Joey was always telling him to just leave it alone, just leave it alone. And then Chris would beat up on him, and he would still just walk away. He would just go into his room or retreat, do whatever, just walk off. He wouldn't deal with it.
How did you observe Joe interacting at all with his younger brother and sister? And if so, what was that like? I'm talking about the younger brother.
Ian and Sarah?
Ian and Sarah.
Yeah. He was always with them. And Sarah was very attached to Joey. She was by him all the time. And then Ian and Sarah were really close, so then Ian kind of hung around too, but Ian got made fun of a lot with his speech, and so did Chris. So he just kind of stuck with my son or with my daughter and Sarah and stuff. So he didn't really hang around with anybody, but Joey was always with Ian and Sarah. Always with Sarah, at least.
And what kind of things would he do?
I honestly don't remember. I just remember them sitting next to the sofa watching dinosaurs. Sarah and Ian loved that show, and Joey used to sit there and watch it with them.
Okay. Did you observe him disciplining them at all?
Not really, but they weren't really bad kids, so they just were their age. They would act, a little.
Pretty young.
Yeah, they would be a bit obnoxious every once in a while, and he would tell them to knock it off and go put them in the other room, put them in timeout or whatever. But he didn't really. And when he was around my kids, they loved him. They loved him. So.
Okay. Okay, thank you, ma'am. I appreciate your time. I have no further questions. Mr. O'Toole may have some. or if you want to cross.
I do, Your Honor. Just wait. Thank
Sure,
you.
go right ahead.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Let me just ask you a couple follow-up questions.
Sure.
And we'll get you out of here. So, Mary Turner is your mom.
Yes.
Good. I'm trying to keep this all straight. Mr. Presti and I have a problem with people with so many
Yeah,
who have the
I
same
com-
names.
That's why I go by Mary Pat.
Very good. It sounds like you knew Mr. McEnroe pretty well for that brief period of 5 years or so when you were in the same sort of location.
Mm-hmm.
He was about 8 up until the time he was 13 or so. He was 13 or so.
Give or take, yeah. I would say, yeah. And then I left, they left to Tucson or Sahuarita, and then they came back a couple years after that also.
Did you have a relationship where you could talk to each other, even though you're 4 years older, where you could sit down and chat and I don't know, maybe not confide in each other at that age, but at least sort of talk about interests and things like that?
He talked more with Chris
Okay.
Bolanos, and then with my sister. Gina was more into like the rock music and stuff, so they kind of had an interest in the music and stuff, so that was more Chris and Bolanos and Gina.
So when you mentioned, for example, So when you mentioned, for example, Mr. McEnroe would go into his room and write or draw. Mm-hmm. How do you know that?
I'd go check on him.
Okay. So I mean, you would see what was going
The
on.
bathroom was like right there, so I would just kind of, I didn't want to say, hey, what are you doing? But I would kind of like, hey, pop my head in. You okay? He's like, yeah.
So did you know, is it Kathy Cote? Mm-hmm. She's got a different name now, though. Kathy Duckett?
Duckett? Yes.
And her daughter, her son is David Cote.
Yes.
She mentioned something about role-playing and those guys sort of fantasy games and things like that. Do you remember that going on?
I didn't do it. My husband did at the time. So.
I didn't mean that you actually role-played. Do you
Yeah.
remember Mr. McEnroe and say David Cote role-playing?
Oh, yes. Well, and Chris Bolanos, Big Chris, my Chris, had like the books, like Dungeons and Dragon books and stuff like that. So they would just go over to David's house, and then one of the neighbors found out, and she was very, I don't want to say like old-fashioned Christian lady, and she was like, oh no. So then that stopped.
And the whole Dungeons and Dragons thing,
Yeah,
and devil worship,
yeah, and
and
all
that
of that. So
right.
that kind of stopped.
In terms of, clearly, you're not maybe the biggest fan of Sean.
No.
Okay. And at some point, I read somewhere that you described her as having no boundaries, and she was, quote, just vile, unquote.
Yeah.
Does that sound like something you said about her? Were you aware of medical issues that she had during this time?
Sean was a hypochondriac.
Okay.
But she did get migraines.
Okay.
So and she got, but that's the whole family gets migraines.
Okay.
So she got migraines a lot.
Were you ever aware whether she had some serious medical issues with respect to, that would have led eventually to a hysterectomy, things like that?
When she would be on her period, it was bad.
Okay. And do you know whether or not she had such medical issues where she had some pretty major surgery?
Not at that point.
Okay. Would you later become aware of it?
Later, yeah, through my mom.
Okay.
Because I didn't contact her. I didn't really talk to her.
Okay. So at least when you knew her, you weren't aware of whether or not she had any medical issues going on in her life.
Yeah, I didn't know.
And I also read somewhere that you and Sean got into, sounds like a pretty big fight. Mm-hmm. And what I'm talking about now is, I'm not making this up. You talked to the defense attorneys about 6 years ago. Mm-hmm. You had to answer yes or no.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
And was it over the phone or in person?
No, they came and showed up at my work.
Okay. And where were you working at the time?
Lowe's.
And where was the Lowe's located?
In Tucson, Arizona. Oh, no, Casa Grande, Arizona, sorry.
Okay. So you were working at Lowe's. And was it Mr. Presti or Mr. Hamaji?
No, I had her. Oh, no, never mind. I was thinking I had Michelle's lawyers ambush me at my work.
Okay. So it wasn't Mr. Presti or Mr. Hamaji?
No, I've talked to them. Well, I talked to Bill, Mr. Presti. I haven't met Mr. Hamaji until yesterday.
Okay.
Sorry.
When you talked to Mr. Presti, was it over the phone or in person?
He came.
Okay. And was that again? He didn't show up at Lowe's, I hope.
No, he came to my home in Casa Grande.
Okay. And you guys sat down and had a chat.
Yes.
Okay. So this is what I'm talking about.
I'm
So
so
correct me if
sorry.
I'm wrong about that. About what I'm asking you about.
Okay.
Okay. And so my notes, which I think are Mr. Presti's notes,
Okay.
are something that you got into a fight with Sean. Sounds right? Mm-hmm. Did you get into more than one fight with her? Mm-hmm. Can I ask you yes or no?
Yes, sorry.
So there was the time when you stepped between her and Mr. McEnroe when he was doing his homework and she got mad at him.
Yes.
And then there was a time that I'm looking at that says that Sean grabbed you and knocked you down and slammed your head into the floor.
That was my sister.
Okay.
We had a big planter thing in the middle of the hallway.
Okay.
Gina was like little Chris, so she was hot. She would not shut up. She didn't leave it alone.
Okay.
So her and Sean went at it. Sean grabbed her and hit her up against this pot thing, and it was a big one, and I had to step in between them.
Okay.
Because that's my little sister, and that's not going to happen.
So it sounds like there was a bit of violence. I don't know if violence is the right word, but there were some pretty bad feelings between you and Sean on more than one occasion.
Yes.
On a lot of occasions?
Yes.
Throughout the time that you knew her?
Yes.
You mentioned also that the last time you talked to Mr. McEnroe, correct if I'm wrong, was that the time when he had Sean talk to you about whether or not you should take the children?
Yes, after that.
Okay.
I got those times mixed up. That was, I talked to him after that.
Okay. So I think you said it was in 1999 that you got that call
Yes.
in which you ended up talking to Sean.
Yes.
And she said, could you, Sean?
Yes.
And she said, could you please take the children?
Yes.
I'm doing this slowly so that I don't get in trouble.
Gotcha.
And she said that she feared they might end up in foster care.
Yes.
And you were in a position where that just wasn't
It was
feasible
going
for
to
you.
happen, yeah.
See that?
You were in a position where that
Was not feasible for you. And the time that the last time you would have talked to Mr. McEnroe was after that.
Yes.
Now, here's what I'm asking. You said it might have been 2003 or 2004,
Yes.
and you thought he was living on the East Coast.
I think. I can't remember if he was there or if he had already come here.
Okay. So that's why I'm asking you. Are you more certain of the time or of the
The
year?
time
or
I
you-
was pregnant with number 5.
Okay, so that would have been 2003 or 2004?
2004.
Okay, very good. 2004?
2004.
Okay, very good. And then finally, I think way back 6 years ago when you chatted with the defense attorneys, I think the movie The Crow, you remember
Yes.
that? And I think you told them that you were familiar with the movie The Crow.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that you remembered that was a favorite movie of Mr. McEnroe.
Okay. Yes.
Is that true? Okay.
Yes.
And that you said he liked the movie because you believe he liked the movie because he looked, quote unquote, looked the part.
Yes.
What did you mean by that? Looked
He
the part?
looked. He was light skinned and the dark hair, and just that was the kind of, I don't know, explain it. Was kind of where he went.
Okay.
If that makes sense. It was like he identified.
He sort of identified with that character
Yes.
in the movie.
Yes.
I think you also told them, though, that you weren't aware of anything called spirit guides. He never
No.
talked about that with you.
Not really, no.
Okay.
Not at that age.
Or some character, some being named the Crow or something like that, other than the movie.
Yeah, no.
And have you seen The Crow?
No.
Oh, okay. So you don't know whether.
Honestly, I don't think so. No.
So when you said Mr. McEnroe looked, Mr. McEnroe looked the part, were you just assuming he looked the part of Brandon Lee, who plays the
Yes.
Crow? All right.
And, yeah, the movie posters or what have you.
And the what?
The movie posters
Okay.
or what have you.
But he would kind of draw the part as well.
Yes.
All right. I think those are all the questions I have. Thank you.
Okay.
A little bit of follow-up.
Sure.
Ma'am, you had a lot of disputes or altercations with Sean over the years, is that right?
Yes.
The things that you said here this afternoon about what Sean was like, was that all true and correct
Yes.
to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
Did you say those things because you just don't like Sean?
No. That was what it was. That's one of the reasons I didn't like Sean, is because she was mean. I mean, I couldn't understand how somebody can be like that towards her sons, her babies.
Okay, so are you testifying against her because you have some kind of lingering grudge against
No.
her or something?
No, it's just the way it is.
Okay, you know that Joe, what he was convicted of, right?
Yes.
He killed 6 innocent people?
Yes.
Why are you here testifying?
Because everybody involved needs closure. He's in limbo basically with where it's going to go at this point.
Okay, so do you still love Joe despite that?
Absolutely, he's my little brother. I consider him my little brother, so.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing further.
Any follow-up?
No, thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. So it's a little bit before 2:30, but let's go ahead and take the break before we reconvene. So, ladies and gentlemen, please leave your notepads and pens there on the chairs. Go discuss the case amongst yourselves, and we'll see you back here in about 15 minutes. Thank you.